Witchcraft is closely associated with so many things. Black cats, pointed hats, cauldrons, broomsticks, wands. A lot of the items that are synonymous with this craft are items that are still used to this day. So today we're taking a critical look at my own practice and seeing whether any of the magical tools that I purchased at the start of my practice are actually the ones that I still use to this day. Are they synonymous with witchcraft because they're really used all the time by every practitioner, or is it a little bit more nuanced than that? For anyone who's new here, my name is Hearth, I'm a practicing witch, and on my channel I try to share as much information as I can all about witchcraft. So if you're interested, feel free to subscribe, I post weekly content. But with that being said, let's start looking into witchcraft tools. Witchcraft is at its core a craft, a magical art, and because of that there are many ways to practice it and many tools and items you may wish to use. But first and foremost, it's about your own inner work, your energy work. You can buy as many magical tools as you want, they aren't going to make you powerful unless you put the work in. But with that being said, I, as well as many other beginners, did fall into the trap of buying items we thought we would use and we ended up never actually using. So I'm really hoping some of you will learn from my mistakes, because a lot of the items that I purchased at the very start just never got used again. So first up, we do have chalices. Now this is just one of the chalices that I have. This isn't my original one, I don't believe. No, this one isn't my original one, but I do have quite a few of these metal chalices. I also have a few ceramic chalices. And ultimately I realized I just don't have a place for them in my practice at the moment. Now you might be thinking, well, if that's the case, then why on earth did you buy it in the first place? And it's because at the start of my practice, I came at witchcraft from a Wiccan perspective. And especially in my studies of traditional British Wicca, there was a lot of emphasis on having the altar set up, having the balance on the altar, and a chalice was a really significant part of that. It was used in altar setups, as well as in ritual work, Sabbath celebrations, Esbat celebrations, and the like, and so it became something that I thought was essential to my magical practice. And so I bought a chalice, and then later on down the line I ended up with another chalice, and then when I wasn't using the metal chalices so much, I tried a ceramic chalice, and then in the end I just went, you know what, I don't think chalices are actually for me. Now chalices can be used in some fantastic ways. They can be used to give offerings to deities, to spirits, to ancestors. They can be used during Sabbath, Esbat or Coven celebrations where you are drinking with people and you are having celebratory feasts after an event. They can be used in hand fasting celebrations, rituals of union. They can also be used to represent the water element. There are so many ways that you can use chalices. I will be brutally honest and say that my chalices now get used as matchstick holders. So when I've used a match and I have the little stick bit left, I will put it in the chalice so that I can use it in my fire magic later. That is the extent of how I use my chalices. And really, you shouldn't be buying a magical tool if it's just going to end up being a burnt out match holder. That is such a strange outcome for all of my chalices. And so now they're mostly decorative. This one is very, very tarnished. As you can see, I really need to give it a polish. And it's just an item that if you are not going to be using it actively in every single one of your workings or even just Sabbath and Esbat celebrations, don't bother with it, because they're often rather expensive, especially to get the ones that are food safe so that you can actively drink out of them. And if it's just going to end up gathering dust, you may as well spend your money on another book that's going to offer you more insight into your magical practice and more growth than an item that's just sitting on a shelf. Next up, we have broomsticks, more accurately, the large full-size broomsticks. Now, I do use besoms in my magical practice, but the large, very traditional besoms and broomsticks that you can get are not going to be useful for everyone. Of course, you might want to use an everyday besom or broomstick for your own personal house cleaning as well as cleansing, but if you're looking at getting a large ritual besom, actually think about how often you're going to use it. I have one, it's sitting just over there on my Brigid altar, and it is used solely for decorative purposes. Because it's so beautiful, I will insert some videos of it so you can see what it's like. It's so beautiful that I don't want to damage it, and so it just ends up sitting on an altar space. And I know that people are going to comment on the way up the broom is meant to be. Different traditions follow different techniques. Some people say the bristles need to be up because this is acting as a decorative decorative broomstick and nothing more. It has been designed by the person who made it to sit in the particular direction it is sitting in. That is how it's going to stay. I know that some people don't like it, but I have to look at it, so I'm going to keep it in the position that it's in, but I don't use my large decorative besoms. They are, however, really suitable for hand fastings. So traditionally, you would have a beautifully decorated besom, and the couple would jump or step over that besom as a way of stepping into a new life, stepping over a threshold, kind of crossing liminal space and entering into their new life. So they are really good for those purposes, and I think that could be a really beautiful reason to have a besom that is of that size. So unless you're going to be using it for cleaning or you're going to be using it for a special occasion like that, they are essentially very large dust collectors, and so you might want to go for something a little bit smaller. Now, the besom I end up using more than any other is actually this one. This one I got from a really small shop in Broadway. I believe it's Broadway in the Cotswolds, and it is so beautiful. This was not expensive at all. It's just a little tiny hand broom, and I use this, you may well have seen it, to clean off all of my altars. I use it for both physical cleaning and for cleansing. Some of the bristles are kind of coming out of it now, but it is so much easier to store and it's so much easier to use. If I'm using an altar, I'm usually using something that's reasonably small, and so I don't need a large besom to be able to cleanse that space. Instead, something like this is so much easier. You can store it in small spaces as well because it does kind of shrink down if you wanted to. I keep this in my divination cabinet, which is essentially like an old drawing writing desk that I have. And so it just fits just inside, so I can close the door on it, and it is so easy. So if you're buying magical tools, choose something that is easy to store and that you're actually going to use regularly, because my besom has been sitting on my Bridget altar now for years. It's not going anywhere. This one I will actively bring out every single time I do my altar. This one is being used, and it's just so cute. Next up, we have athames, specifically athames and swords, but I don't have a sword, I just have an athame. I'm not sure if YouTube is going to allow me to actually show you mine, but they are essentially ritual knives that are used in spellwork and ritual. Varying traditions will have them be practical items, whereas others they will simply be ceremonial in nature. Now, I actually have an athame that I was given as a birthday present, and I absolutely love it. If I can, I will show you what it looks like, but if you don't see it, it's because YouTube really didn't like it. So this is my athame. It is so gorgeous. Now, my athame is blunt because it is designed for ceremonial and energetic use only, but you can use athames that are designed for cutting up herbs, carving into candles, and the like, depending on your tradition. Some people will use swords for this purpose. They can be used for marking ritual spaces, opening and closing circles. They can be used in larger ceremony as well as individual practice as well. Those swords are typically designed for larger ceremonies involving more people and a lot bigger of a space. These tools can be incredibly useful if it's the style of practice that you're going for. Witchcraft isn't just one thing, and not everyone is going to use the same tools. For me, I have used my athame in place of a wand or my hand when opening and closing circles. I have used it for directing energy, and it is very useful and very good for that. But can you use your hands? Yes. Can you make a wand or buy a wand if that's something you would prefer? Yes, it's one of those tools where unless you are actively going to use it regularly, a bit like a chalice, or it's a fundamental part of the tradition that you belong to, I don't think you necessarily need to get one unless you know you're going to use it. If you've gone to a lot of open circles and you've had experience using magical tools, maybe with the collective, or you've seen other people use them and you're really, really drawn to it, I would say give it a miss until you know that it's definitely something you're going to want to use, because they are not cheap, especially not now, because good ones that are made by practitioners for practitioners are not particularly cheap and easy to come by, so just make sure it's something you actually want. Having just talked about athames, let's talk about their counterpart, the wand. Now, I actually still have my first purchased wand. The first wand that I actually had, I made myself and it broke. I was very sad about it. I think I still have the bits somewhere, but this is the first one that I purchased. And for anyone who is aware of wands, you will likely notice that this is a very traditionally made wand. It is designed using the Wiccan measurement system, where essentially your wand has to go from the inside of your elbow to the tip of your finger, and it is made by a practitioner for practitioners. This was one of those purchases that I really wanted to make, and I saved up for a while to be able to get it, and I loved it. But then my practice swayed away from Wicca, and I realised I was using it less and less. I actually do have a counterpart to this in a dark wood. I forget exactly what wood each of them is. They are so beautiful, but I found myself not really using it in the way that I was expecting to use it, because my practice no longer revolved around the set traditions that I'd started with. I was doing more outside workings, and a wand this size, this is big, by the way, if that gives you any idea, this is right next to my head. It is a sizable magical tool. I didn't want to damage it. I was finding I wasn't taking it out with me, and so I wasn't doing outside workings with it. And so what was the reason of having it if I wasn't actively using it in my practice? And so as time went on, I just stopped using it. It doesn't mean, though, that wands aren't going to be for you. It's just going to depend on the tradition that you are a part of. If a wand this size isn't something that is required in your tradition, it's not something you're after, there are other options. I still do use wands in my magical practice to this day, in varying forms and in varying circumstances. So my favourite wand, I have to be careful what I say because I have another wand here that is very, very... I don't want to hurt their feelings. The wand that I have used the most is actually this wand. So this wand is actually made from antler. This is naturally fallen antler. And an amazing artist, if it will focus on it, has essentially turned it into a wand. So on this side we have a tiger eye set in, we have carnelian set in all around the top and a quartz point, and it is so beautiful and so lovely to use. And so this is the one that I would commonly use in a lot of my outdoor rituals. This is what I would take with me when I'm doing outdoor circles and these kind of things, because it is a lot more hard wearing, and you might not think it because there's crystals attached to it, but this is antler that is designed to take a lot of impact when it is on the animal, and when the animal sheds those antlers, it is just as strong. And so for me, something like this is a lot easier to carry with me than something like this. The size difference is immense, and also the durability is different. And so this is a one that I would take out with me, especially the more ceremonial style rituals. I would use something like this. Now I do have another wand. I have a lot of wands. I have wands for different deities. So I have a Ceridwen wand that is actually a tongue twister. I also have a Brigid one as well. The Brigid one is sitting on my Brigid altar. The Ceridwen wand is actually sitting just here. This is my other wand that is designed specifically for Ceridwen. And so I do have wands for this particular purpose, but my most recent wand is one that I really enjoy working with. This is a Blackthorn wand. And so this is one that I purchased, well no, actually I got it as a gift. This was a birthday gift last year. It is a beautiful Blackthorn wand, and it has an actual cutout here. I'm sure you can see straight through there. It is so finely crafted. It is still wooden. It is still likely to get damaged if I were to take it out and not be careful, but the size difference is immense. Can we just compare that? That's incredible. And it's the difference between something that aligns more with ceremony, with tradition, with being a certain length to suit each individual practitioner, for it to be made of a certain wood for certain jobs, to being something that is very folk-based, that is based off a wood that I feel very, very drawn to. There's a reason why my podcast was called Through the Blackthorn Arch. It's because I really do love the mythology and the folklore surrounding the Blackthorn, and so a wand like this is far more useful to me than a wand like this. And ultimately, it comes down to what you feel drawn to. If you are part of a set tradition that requires a set length, fantastic, go for that, but choose a wood that you feel particularly drawn to. Look into the Ogham, look into some folklore and tradition, look into the background stories and the legends surrounding different woods, and find one that is really connected to you. If you find you're struggling to find a tree that you're drawn to, maybe go with your birth tree. This is another option as well. If you don't really like the idea of wooden ones, then you can always go for something that's made of metal or something that's made of antler like this, but ultimately, if you don't need a wand, you don't feel drawn to having a wand, you're only getting it because you think you need it, you don't need it. You can simply use your hands, you can use your fingers. It's what I use more often than not in all of my workings, unless I'm doing some kind of more complex ceremonial style of especially circle casting, then I will call forward and use a wand. Whereas otherwise, I'll typically just use my hands. So for me, wands are one where I got something I thought I would use, but I ended up switching into a different style entirely. The tool is still useful for me, just in a slightly different way. If anyone knows the backstory of this deck already, you will know why I want to put it down so quickly. Where should I put it? I'm gonna put it there, okay? As soon as I picked it up, I could feel it, and it was horrible. Okay. So while we're on the subject of ceremony, of larger rituals, perhaps Esbat or Sabbat celebrations, I need to talk about ritual clothes and cloaks. Now, as mentioned when I got started, I was very heavily in the Wiccan ceremonial style of practice. And with that was an emphasis on ritual tools, being sky-clad, as well as having a ritual cloak. And so I purchased a purple velvet cloak. I love it to this day. I saved up so much to be able to get it, and it is beautiful, and I used it in many of the first formal rituals that I did, a lot of the ceremonies, both individual as well as with groups, and I really enjoyed it. However, big however, it is massively too long for me. I'm only 5'3", and because of that, my cloaks will drag on the ground at all times, and I did not know how to actually shorten it. So maybe that's something that I need to do this year. I need to properly fit my cloak and get it to be the right length. Also, they are not suitable for all workings, all styles of practice, all places, or all traditions, and so now I don't use it, which is honestly a real shame because it is a beautiful thing. I love it so much. I have it in a bag. It's in my apothecary cabinet, just sitting there, and I need to use it more, but I find that I just don't. Don't get me wrong, I did find my workings to be incredibly powerful when I was working skyclad, when I was working with just my ritual wear. It was great, but that is not something everyone is going to feel comfortable with. For anyone who's not aware, skyclad is essentially the same as saying naked, but you might be wearing like a ritual cloak over the top of it. This is not something everyone is going to feel comfortable with. It's not something you have to do, and I will put massive emphasis on this here. If people are saying you have to do it, especially in a group setting, and you were not pre-warned of this, that is a massive red flag. Please get out of there. Because you don't need to be for successful magical practice. Today, the majority of my practice is done just in my day-to-day life, a quiet evening here, a midnight there, perhaps a particularly strong astrological event. I am not setting up for having a large ritual typically, and so I'm not thinking about ritual wear and ritual cloaks. I'm just doing it in whatever I'm wearing. I will also say that you need to be incredibly careful, especially in a world now where we have fast fashion for witchcraft supplies. We are getting things made in unsafe conditions with materials that are not suitable, and if you aren't careful, one step too close to an unprotected candle and your entire cloak might go up in flames. You need to be incredibly careful. Make sure that you are getting your supplies from sources that know what they are doing, know why they are doing the things that they're doing, and ideally from a magical practitioner who understands the significance of such an item. And I know that that's not easy for everyone because that makes things a lot more expensive. But this is a tool that you do not need. It is something that may be nice to have, but it definitely isn't a requirement. Now moving on to divination. Now divination is something where I dabbled in a few different things over time, and ultimately what I've ended up in is very different from how I started, and so a lot of those earlier tools I simply don't use. Now the difference between other magical tools in this video and divination is that I do believe a sense of trial and error is really required when it comes to divination tools. A lot of the other magical tools can be substituted for other things. For instance, with wands, I don't know if I actually mentioned it, but I probably should have, you can make your own wand. You don't have to buy one. You can find a piece of fallen wood from a tree that you feel particularly connected to, or you're able to form a connection with a tree and request one of its branches, and if it agrees to that request, you can then take a small branch so that you can dry it and then use it in your magical practice. You don't have to buy your own wands. But when it comes to divination tools, you often do have to purchase them, especially when we're talking about tarot cards, oracle cards. Unless you are particularly gifted in the arts and crafts department, it's not something that you're necessarily going to be able to create yourself, especially with all of the symbolism that goes behind all of the images in the cards. And so for me, I found that I went through a massive evolution with my divination style and technique over time. So the first thing that I purchased is in this little bag. And I remember when I got these because I had never been on eBay before. This was before I found, say, Pagan Dreams. That was an amazing pagan website that had like loads of supplies. That's where a lot of my earlier supplies do actually come from, is Pagan Dreams. This was before I realised that website existed. So I remember it was my first foray onto eBay, and I purchased 2 sets of runes. This is one of them. I bought an obsidian set and I bought an opalite set completely accidentally. I was meant to only buy one. I thought I put them in a basket. I accidentally just instant purchased them, and so I had to talk to the guy and be like, I'm so sorry. Can I just get the obsidian ones? And he was so lovely. But this was my first ever set of runes. So inside this bag, we have this very battered sheet here that's got a little tiny bit of information on it. And then inside we have small, really tiny rune stones. They kind of match my nails. Well, not kind of, they do match my nails entirely. They are so beautiful and I love them. Right, I absolutely love them. And I use them dedicatedly. So I really did use them for about 10 years of my practice. I really used them. It was my main focal point were runes. But as time has gone on and as I've shifted and changed and developed as a practitioner, I find that although these have the most intense energy, like they're like weighing my hand down, if no one else feels energy in the same way, that's probably not going to make any sense. But when something is really energetically heavy, it feels like literally heavy. Like I can feel almost like someone is pulling down on my hand. It's really intense. They feel amazing. But my practice has grown and shifted and developed and I don't use them in the same way anymore. Moving on to my Ogham set. These I got many years after I got the runes, and these are really my first dive into tree magic and tree energy. And each one of these has a particular symbol on it that represents a different tree in the Celtic tree Ogham. These I really loved. But I found that I never really used them as divination. Instead, these became really a springboard into my practice of tree spirit work and tree magic, and it really dived me into that world. And so I don't use these for divination, but this is the reason, or one of the many reasons, why my practice is the way it is today. If I hadn't have seen these, if I hadn't have purchased these and deep dived into researching them, I would never ever be working with trees in the way that I am today. And so despite both of these being tools that I don't use now, they did have such a profound impact on my practice. And so this video is not me saying don't buy magical tools. It's simply a case of make sure you do your research and figure out what magical tools you're likely going to use or you want to learn more about, and which ones you're only getting because you feel like you should. I think that's the main thing. Don't purchase something because it's the thing to purchase or the modern craze or the thing that you feel like you should be working with. Buy things and connect with things that you feel particularly drawn to. So whether it's in your practice for a season, that season could be 5 years, 10 years, 5 months, 10 months, whatever it is, or if it's something that's going to influence your practice forever, that holds value rather than having an item that you are never going to use. Like I think I can count on one hand the number of times I've used a chalice in ritual. So like those two things are very different for me. Then when it came to buying decks, I'll reach over here. I purchased, this deck. I have spoken about this deck before. I will leave my deck video up here if you do want to check it out. This was the first tarot deck that I ever got. This is a Royal Tarot, and by that I mean it is just the major arcana. And this is one that I purchased online because I did not have access to any occult stores at the time. There was nowhere I could go in person. So I purchased it online and I really struggled with this deck. It fought me every single step of the way until eventually I had to concede and never use it ever again. And even now, I don't like the feel of it. I got this out of my cabinet and immediately it was like, we're going to make you feel all of the things that you felt last time. I'm like, great, thanks. So this is just a little bit of a warning of make sure that you also do your research on tarot and oracle decks as well. I will get into more of those in a minute, because sometimes if something looks good online, it doesn't mean that the energy is going to connect with you. And this is one where the artwork I liked, the energy did not work for me. So if you're wanting to buy something like a tarot or an oracle deck, I need to put this down. I would recommend going to somewhere in person where you can check them out. And I know that that isn't always easy to do, but it does mean that you can get a feel of the energy, because I can feel it all across here. Burns, and it does every single time I hold the deck without fail. Now, another divination tool that I think a lot of people get are pendulums. And the reason for this is because they are really affordable. You're looking at pendulums, even crystal pendulums, metal pendulums, from about £5 upwards. So I've seen pendulums that are solid silver, solid gold, they have precious gemstones in them, and they can be upwards of 50, 60 into the hundreds of pounds, but you can go to very, very simple pendulums that are just £5, £6 if they're made of just a very common stone. You can also make them yourself. If you have a ring, you can take a ring and put it on a length of string, as long as you tie it so it is just a single length of string so it can swing in any direction. You can make your own pendulum that way. And that is something I would recommend. If you are interested in working with pendulums, make one yourself rather than buying one to start off with. Because especially when we're looking at crystal pendulums, often you don't know where those crystals have been mined, and it's very hard to track compared to tumble stones and larger stones where often you can follow them on their journey. A lot of companies will actually go to the mines themselves to pick the stones to make sure everything is okay with what they're doing. With pendulums, that isn't always easy to do, and so you have no idea who is mining them, whether they are being paid, whether it is sustainable. You simply can't know. And so especially when we're seeing mass-produced pendulums on sites like Temu and AliExpress, you really have no idea where they've come from. If you want to purchase one, try to get one that is maybe a little bit better quality, where you can have an understanding of where it's come from, perhaps maybe even one that's been handmade, and in the meantime you can create something yourself that you can practice with. The divination tools that I've ended up using the most in the past few years have actually been tarot and oracle cards. Now, I have done a video on the difference between the two, but really, really briefly, tarot cards will typically follow the same format. Often they will follow a pre-existing deck, so a really common one would be the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. All decks that are based off this deck will follow the same system, and the artwork will largely be the same. So if you pull the Sun card in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, it will be the same in a different deck. The meaning will be the same, but the artwork might be slightly different. This means that once you've learned tarot once, you can apply that to every single deck that you buy that's based off the same system. The artwork will often vary the kind of readings that you get out of it, because your intuition is going to be drawn to certain aspects of those cards. When it comes to oracle cards, each oracle deck is unique unto itself. They will have a varying number of cards. Tarot typically has 78, whereas oracle cards can vary from anything down to 15 all the way up to several hundred. The artwork is different and the meaning of each card is different in each deck, so there's not really much crossover there. So you can have thousands of oracle decks, and a lot of people do in their collections, and they will each have their own unique system, their own unique artwork, their own unique foundation, whereas with tarot, they tend to be based off several systems. So there's a few different origin systems out there, but the Rider-Waite-Smith is typically the most common. So I'll be honest, I will use oracle decks secondary to tarot. So this is one of my more recent ones. This is the Healing Waters Oracle. I got this last year, and they're just really nice additional cards for readings. So if I just get one out of here so you can have an idea of what the cards typically will look like. So just as an example, we have this card here. This is Immerse Yourself, Training, Learning, New Hobbies and Passions. And the cards may look like this. They're really good additional cards. You can use them for focal points in spells and rituals, in meditations, in trance work. You can use them as central points in altars. You can use them for specific readings, as an entire reading or as an add-on to a reading. So I do find them to be really good additions to other things, not just for divination. The same also applies for runes and Ogham. You can use them in a really similar way. But if you're not wanting anything on a set style, so for instance, this is all about water energy. If you want something that's more generic, or reading cards just doesn't particularly intrigue you, there are many different forms of divination out there, so don't feel like you have to get an oracle deck. You can go for a tarot deck, so this is the box for my tarot deck. So this is my tarot deck that I will use for my own readings. I've customized it so I can fit it in my hand, and this is something that I would say is a good option if you are looking for something that's maybe a little bit more versatile. You are interested in perhaps reading reversals, because that's something I'm not sure if you can see here. Some of my cards are direct and some will be, if I can find a reversal in here, some will be reversals. And so I do typically read reversals with tarot, but I don't with oracles. So if that's something that you're looking into, then that is something that could be really, really useful. The other thing as well is when you're looking at tarot and oracle cards, it's typically good to go for something that you're really drawn to, and also you can go for something that's really affordable. My favorite deck of cards is the Rider-Waite-Smith. It's one of the cheapest types of cards that you can get. It's just a really kind of standard version. I was going to say standard model, like we're talking about cars or PCs or something. So if you want to read reversals, tarot are fantastic. They have a variety of different meanings and symbolism, and it can be a really good way of adding to your just day-to-day practice. They're also really great for doing divination before and after spell work and ritual to decide whether or not that working has been successful and whether it will be successful before you even attempt it. And generally they're just really useful if you feel drawn to working with them. Just because you see all the tarot readers on the internet does not mean that you have to read tarot as well. Divination tools in general don't have to be included in your witchcraft if you don't want them to be. They are just a nice addition if you would like to include them. I will say though, especially with tarot, if you do want to get a deck, I would recommend getting one instead of making one. Mostly because, especially with something like the Rider-Waite-Smith system, there is a lot of symbolism and numerology that goes into all of the artwork on the cards. And they can be really pivotal in getting that subconscious and psychic reading out of you if that is something you do want to learn and develop rather than just going through a book. There's nothing wrong with working with the book, it's just a slightly different technique. If you're making them yourself, you might miss all of that symbolism, the colour representation, the numerology in there, and it might be not quite the same as if you were to go for another deck. You can get really affordable decks. The Rider-Waite-Smith is a much more affordable option than a lot of the others, just as a starter one, and then see where you go from there. Next up, we're talking crystals, something that is so commonplace on the internet today. You have large crystal sales happening on TikTok. There are people whose entire job is to just go live and sell them, and I can understand the popularity. They're very beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. They have really powerful energy, but that doesn't mean you have to incorporate them into your magical practice. I remember vividly when I first moved out, there was a beautiful witchcraft shop. It was kind of a witchcraft hippie shop, and they had an entire table of tumblestones. So every single weekend when I had some free time, I would go into the shop and I would get 1 or 2 tumblestones that I would add to my collection. And I've ended up with kind of a big chalice of tumblestones. I can probably count on one hand how many times I've used some of them because I ended up getting them thinking that I would eventually find a working that I would use them in, and I ended up just never finding it. And it's not because they aren't lovely and they aren't powerful, and I will still use them in my practice to this day because if I've got them, I may as well use them. But if I were to come at my practice with what I know now, I probably wouldn't have bothered getting them in the first place. I would instead have gone with quartz. Raw quartz, just rough rock quartz. If you do want tumbled quartz, that's an option as well. It is so powerful for amplifying the energies, and really it's the only crystal today where I could still do with getting a few bigger pieces so that I can mark the edge of my circle or the edge of my compass, whatever it is that I'm working with at that time, with them, because that would be incredibly useful for me as marking points, as well as for helping to amplify and strengthen that energy. It is not something that I would necessarily buy loads of little tumblestones of anymore. It just isn't something that I would do. And I would, especially now with the mass production of tumbled stones, it's really hard to know where they've come from. And as mentioned with the pendulums, whether the people that are working in those spaces are actually being treated with respect, or are actually being paid, or actually safe. So it's something that I think we really need to be mindful of. When it comes to herbs, I've actually gone the entire opposite way. So at the start of my magical practice, I thought I would focus more on the crystals. I didn't think I would go so much into the herbs. And so despite having lots of books on green witchcraft and all of this kind of aspect of practice, I never had a large herb collection, whereas now, because I have the business as well, I do have a very large herb collection and I do use them. And that is something that definitely is going to build up over time. So if you are interested in getting herbs, start with small volumes. You do not need to be getting, my size of volume is like a jar this big, but that's because I have a witchcraft business. And so because of that, I do use a lot more herbs than you would if you were an individual. So just bear that in mind. You don't need large amounts. If you want to grow your own, it's even better. If you're going to purchase, go through a supplier that is trusted. And just go with smaller amounts, because it's much better to have a smaller volume that you can connect with than a large volume that's going to go bad. If you want to, or if you can, try to connect with the plant spirit as well. That's going to make your workings far more powerful. And it is something that I would have focused on a lot more had I known how I would be with it now. Now it's a really big part of my practice. Before, I'd never really fully considered it, or at least fully focused in on it. Next up, we have a magical tool that's very heavy, and I'm looking forward to putting it down. We're talking cauldrons. Now, cauldrons are synonymous with witchcraft. Along with wands and broomsticks, we see them as being a core part in the belief of witchcraft, even among people who don't truly believe in it today. We see Halloween costumes of witches cackling over a bubbling cauldron. They are so closely linked to witchcraft. Do I actually use them? You know what? I actually do, which is a surprise because a lot of the things in this video have been, I bought it, I never used it, but this is one that I have actually used. Now, I don't necessarily use them in the way that I was expecting to use them. So when I first bought a cauldron, I was expecting to do a lot of water-based workings in them. I have found that to be rather tricky because a lot of the cauldrons I have in my collection are made of cast iron. And anyone who knows anything about cast iron will know, don't get it wet. And if you do, make sure it dries really, really quickly, because otherwise you end up with this. Can we see this? This came from a working that I was doing that involved salt and water. And of course, while I was flicking the salt and water around my space to aid in cleansing it, I got it all over my cauldron. Did I notice that at the time? Of course I didn't. I noticed this approximately 4 weeks later. So please be careful with water and cauldrons, but it is something I do use in my magical practice. My first cauldron I can't show you because it's currently outside at my parents' house, probably very rusty. I used it a lot for burning petitions, burning herbs, as well as burning rosemary sticks for cleansing. You can put sand in the bottom and you can burn loose incense on charcoal discs. You can use them, especially with sand in the bottom, as a place for candles to be burned. So if you set your candle into the sand, it allows it to burn down in that space. They're a great representational tool for transformation, development, growth, knowledge, fertility, abundance, all of these things that are very closely associated as well with the goddess Cauldron and the stories of the Cauldron of Knowledge and Taliesin and all of these other figures. So it's a tool that is synonymous with witchcraft, but I do find them to be rather useful, and I will have cauldrons for different things. I have cauldrons on my Cauldron altar. I have cauldrons specifically for cleansing. I have cauldrons like this one that are specifically for workings. I have them in varying sizes, but I will say this now, I have lots of cauldrons because I sell cauldrons. And I think it's really important to remember that when you are looking at social media witchcraft, you are looking at individuals whose job it is to be invested in witchcraft. Now, a lot of the cauldrons that I have, excluding the ones on my Cauldron altar, my first cauldron, and also the copper cauldron that you will have seen in previous videos, they have defects. So this cauldron is a great example of it. You can't see it while I'm holding it like this or when I'm holding it from the handle, but if I were to sit this on the table, it would lean like this. And that's because one of the legs was made slightly too short, and so it became a seconds. This is one that I could not sell on the stall, and so I ended up keeping it. And so a lot of the tools, especially things like cauldrons that I have, are actually seconds that I simply couldn't sell, and so I've added them into my own collection. And this kind of follows on from the previous video I did, which is like behind the spells, like the reality of social media witchcraft is a lot of the times what you see isn't always going to be 100% accurate. Would I have 5, 6, 7 cauldrons if it weren't for the business? Probably not. Do you need that many? Definitely not. So if you want to buy a cauldron, it's really worth looking into the kind of workings that you want to be doing. You don't just have to get cast iron. You can get cast iron, you can get ceramic cauldrons. There's lots of different options, and what you go for is going to vary. Cast iron is really good because they can withstand a lot of heat. They also are on the legs, which makes them really useful for burning things like incense and candles, and you can have them suspended over a fire if you do want to do workings that way as well. So they're really good for that option. But if you want to be doing scrying in your cauldron, then maybe something ceramic would be better because it's a lot easier to clean. It's not going to rust. You're not going to have some of the same issues. It's really going to depend on what you want. You have cauldrons that are very narrow-necked. These are more bell-shaped cauldrons, and then you have, much like mine here, which is a bowl-shaped cauldron, and they're going to be useful for different things as well. You have different sizes varying from very, very small to absolutely huge, and realistically, something this size is probably about as big as the average practitioner alone is ever going to need. If you are doing workings with a coven, of course that's going to be different, but if you're just an individual, this is like the size of my head. Yes, it has spell remains in it. Just ignore that bit. But realistically, the average individual solo practitioner is not going to need something bigger than this. If you are part of a coven, you might find that a much bigger cauldron, possibly one that's copper and therefore more lightweight, might be used, because this is heavy. Like, this is heavy, and it's only this big, so just bear that in mind as well. Ultimately, as with all of the tools so far, if you're not going to use a massive cauldron, don't bother getting one. Start small, see if you like it. If you don't use it, it's not the end of the world. You can always give it to another practitioner. You can always sell it online. There's lots of options there. Don't go for something too big, though, because it's going to be much harder to figure out what to do with it afterwards if you don't use it in your witchcraft. And then the last thing in this video is really the only thing where I would say, buy one. Get one, jump in, do it, you won't regret it. Very different from everything else in this video, and that is Books of Shadows. Now these are just two of mine. You might have noticed I like green. Green is a particular thing for me. Get one, please. And if you don't want to get something this fancy, you don't need to. You can get just a standard notebook. You can get a slightly nicer notebook if you'd like to. You can do something digital, but if it's digital, back it up, double back it up, triple back it up. Make a physical copy anyway, because if you lose it, you will regret it. Books of Shadows don't have to be super duper expensive or intricate. This is one of my fancier Book of Shadows. This one is leather bound with kind of the handmade paper inside, and it is gorgeous. I have no regrets in ever purchasing this, but if you can't, don't want to, or don't have the ability to buy something like this, just a normal notebook is far better than not doing anything. Write down all of the workings that you're doing, detailing them out, exactly what the intention was, when you did it, how you did it, the items that you included, any deities, spirits, elements that you worked with. Write it all down. Not only write it all down, but then write updates as well, so that you know when that working manifested, how it manifested, the different ways it showed up, the readings that you did surrounding that working. Write it all down. An alternative to getting a Book of Shadows like this is to actually get a diary like this. This is a really simple thing. This was only £5, this diary was, from Dunelm, and inside you have pages that are lined. I'm not sure if you can see that, and then at the top here it says date. And it just means that you can date when you did your workings, when you saw manifestations from that workings, write down all of your tarot readings, what the tarot readings were for, what spread you used, write down whether you did an intuitive reading, whether it was based off the book, or do both. Do an intuitive reading and then go through the book and see how your practice and your skills are developing over time. This, even something like this, is better than doing nothing. At the very start, didn't write very much down at all. What I did write down, I wrote in a leopard print, a furry leopard print notebook, and I cannot find that notebook anywhere. I then used to write in just standard ring-bound notebooks, and I have lost so many of. They just blended in with all of my lecture notes from university, and I don't know what's what anymore. I'm going to have to go through all of them to find them. So if you can get a dedicated notebook and you can keep it in a safe space, and do keep it in a safe space, and date when you started it, when you do your workings, in 5 years, 10 years, you are so going to be glad that you had that to look back on. So this is the one thing I would say. If you don't get anything else, the Book of Shadows is really the thing that I would recommend. I mean, you can get things like these. These are from paper blanks. Yeah, paper blanks. And they are lined books, and they're just a little bit fancier. And just something like this is so good. I can't even tell where that's coming from. Ooh, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like a wolf. I don't know where that's coming from. So those are some of the magical tools in my collection, and the kind of mistakes and changes that I made with them along the way. I would love to know what magical tools you purchased at the start of your practice. Do you still use them to this day, or are there just some that never saw the light of day ever again? I would love to know, and I think it's really important that we talk about the not so great and perfect sides of witchcraft as well. Because especially when we have this desire to be as aesthetically pleasing as the next practitioner, to have as many things and as many items, there's a lot more comparison now than there ever used to be. Instead, we were very much talking about what we were doing. It was very a doing-based conversation. Whereas now, I think that especially TikTok and Instagram is very much an item-forward form of conversation. All of the workings are very item-focused, item-heavy. And I know that I do talk about items on this channel, but I do just want to emphasize that these things are not the make or break of your practice. If anything, you are better off, especially at the start, building up with just your own energy, just your own intention, and then adding items onto it at a later point when you feel the need to work with them. I would love to know though as well what your favorite item is in your entire collection. Do you have one thing that you love so much and that you would never ever get rid of or change? I would love to know. So with that being said, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you are at the end, feel free to put some star emojis and I will try to heart as many of them as I can. If you do have any video ideas, questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section. And if you do enjoy the magical practice on this channel or in this video, feel free to hit subscribe. I try to post magical content every single week. So with that being said, I hope you have a marvelous magical day. I hope you're all staying safe and I will see you in the next video. Bye!